Okay, we're going to get started. My name is Tanya Carlone. I am the facilitator. I will be facilitating this meeting. It's our second of 15 meetings. So welcome. I am with the Center for Collaborative Policy. We are based out of Sacramento State University. We are neutral facilitators, and our mission is to assist public agencies and the public to build their capacity to use collaborative strategies to develop better public policy. And that's what we're here for, and we are a neutral facilitation team. My invaluable member of my team over here is Stephanie Horry. She will be taking notes. Realize that we will be developing high-level summaries that will be made public at the end of this workshop series. And there will be several of them around the state between now and the 9th of June. Today, we are webcasting. So be aware that there is a webcast occurring, and then when we have a comment period, we will take questions in the room, and then we will stop every now and again to see if there are questions coming in via email. And Denise is helping us with DPR. She is on the webcast. So I'd like to go ahead and have you look at your agendas, and I'll do a quick agenda review. Oh, let me do a little housekeeping first. Just because this is the policy of the Cal EPA building, we want to make sure that in the very unlikely case that we had to evacuate the building, that you know what you're supposed to do. And that is, please do not use the elevators, go down the stairs, and we'll evacuate across the way to Cesar Chavez Plaza. Also, the bathrooms are to the left and down a corridor. You just go ahead and follow the signs if you should need the restrooms. And if you would please silence your cell phones, we would greatly appreciate that. And so let's go ahead and look at our agenda so that we can have a review and you can understand where we're going today in the next hour and a half. The purpose of today's meeting, as it says there, is to receive input from all affected parties on concepts that DPR intends to use in the development of new regulations for potential restrictions on pesticide use near schools. So I'd like for you to understand, and Chris Reardon, the Chief Deputy Director of DPR, will explain the process to you a little bit more as we get into the proceedings, but that this is these are, and you'll see the asterisk at the bottom, these workshops are in addition to and prior to the required public meetings that come with the development of the regulation or the rulemaking process. So this is not the last opportunity you'll have to make comments, and you'll also find out from George Farnsworth with DPR that he will be providing you with his email, and DPR is open to and wants to hear from you, so you will have many opportunities to provide comment. Looking at the agenda after my opening remarks here, Chris Reardon, the Chief Deputy Director of the Department of Pesticide Regulation, will further expand on the purpose of today's meeting and provide additional opening remarks. Then George Farnsworth, who is the Enforcement Branch Chief, he will provide a greater context so that you understand the current requirements and restrictions that already exist. And then he will continue to go into the regulation concepts that the department is currently considering in the development of this regulation. And that's where we would really like your input around those concepts. And then most of the meeting today is going to be spent on getting your input and feedback. And that's what that key interests and ideas section is about. And then Chris will wrap it up for us again. Are there any questions about the agenda before we get rolling here? Okay, thank you. Chris.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Thank you, Tanya. Well, welcome all. When we were looking at some dates for agricultural the agricultural sector in this workshop, I was throwing out some ideas to some folks, and I mentioned May and June, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You can imagine there was wild enthusiasm. It's just simply not going to work for a lot of us. So I wanted to thank all of you for being here. I know that there's other stuff going on, but we really appreciate you being here and look forward to your input this afternoon. What I thought I'd do, just briefly outline, give you a general outline of what we hope to accomplish today. And first off, say this is an informal process. We're going to eventually get to, and we'll work through a timeline later, but we'll get to talk about our formal process. But this is an informal process, a fact-finding mission, so to speak, for DPR as we look at developing a statewide regulation, adding further restrictions to pesticide use around schools. So what we hope to accomplish today is, I think George, as Tanya mentioned, is going to walk through sort of our current requirements, regulation concepts, with some specificity, with the hope that that is going to generate some questions and some thoughts on your part. We've also put together some questions as well beforehand that we've discussed and talked about, and I hope that you've thought about some questions to throw our way and have us think about as well. But I think it's really important to understand that we don't view this as a debate. We view this as just fact-finding, listening session to get as much information as we can before we go out toward the end of this year to develop regulations. So anyway, thank you for being here. And I think, George, that you work through the time. We'll work through our process here. This is just, I'll talk about this at the end, but in terms of process, this is the first public meeting. We anticipate going public meetings through June 9th, and then we're going to have comment period open to July 31st. For those that want to submit comments to DPR, July 31st. Our goal is to to go out with a regulation by the end of this year. We put on there approximate December 15th. That is our goal. Sometimes because of other challenges, we could do it sooner, we could do it a little bit later, but that is our goal as we speak. February, if another official hearing is requested, once we officially notice it and we're asked to do a public hearing, that'll be in the February timeframe. And then our hope is in a complex process like this, normally a rulemaking will take us somewhere between 9 months and a year. So we would expect to have this rulemaking done by the end of 2016, potentially early 2017 at the latest. But that's our thoughts right now. In terms of time frame. So I wanted to put this in. We'll talk about it at the end of this session as well, but I just wanted to put this in your mind as you're thinking about questions as well. Any questions on that? Let me also, before we get started, introduce the DPR team that's sort of the lead on this. We're actually doing 15 workshops in 5 different locations. This is our second, who's counting, we anticipate to be we're going to be in the Central Coast next week. We'll be in the San Joaquin Valley, then we're going down to Imperial County as well. But George Farnsworth to my right, our enforcement chief. George is the lead on this from a DPR perspective. Randy Sagawa in the front row here is our special assistant to the program, is also going to be involved. And Charlotte Fadipi, our assistant director of communications, is also going to be involved in this project as well. We also have, I think, about 10 or 11 ag commissioners. Stand up, guys, so they can see you. And from all over Northern California, our local partners, and really appreciate you being here as well to listen and give input as well. So I wanted to notice them as well. So I think our next step would be George sort of beginning our process to walk you through some of our current requirements and so hopefully generate some questions. George?
Thank you, Chris. I'd like to start off with a little bit of background, kind of an overview of pesticide regulatory activities in California. Remember, we're doing this presentation to several different groups. We're doing it to school administrators, to industry, and also for the general public and parents and teachers. So some of this information, may seem very redundant to some folks, but can be an eye-opener for others. So please be patient as I go through this. Before a product can be sold in California, it first must be registered by US EPA and then registered by DPR. But before either of those can happen, the manufacturers of all pesticides must demonstrate that they can be used safely and that workers, consumers, and their children and others will not be adversely affected. Our mandate here at DPR is to ensure that pesticides are used safely. We evaluate each pesticide under the guidelines of the Food and Agricultural Code to ensure no harm will occur to human health or the environment when products are used according to labels. For each product, we review product chemistry and composition, acute and chronic data, acute and chronic toxicity data, environmental fate data, efficacy against target pests, hazards to non-target organisms, and of course, worker exposure data. Our program activities do not stop at the registration process. We have an ongoing, continuous evaluation of all pesticides being used. Those of you familiar with DPR know that we have environmental monitoring branch, we've got a worker health and safety branch, and both of those branches are continuously conducting studies of how pesticides behave in the environment. We regulate pesticides through laws, regulations, and something some folks might not be familiar with, permit conditions at the local level. Every pesticide must have a label, and it is a violation of state law to use a product inconsistent with its labeling. So we always use the term, the label's the law, and we expect folks to follow it. DPR can also adopt regulations to help fine-tune laws and labeling, depending upon need. Some of the regulations we've adopted over the years are very general in nature and are applied statewide. An example of that is the worker protection, personal protective equipment regulations we've had on the books for many years. Those apply statewide. There are other rules that we've adopted that are very specific to pesticides, crops, timing, and geographical location. Example of that are the permit conditions that we have in place for application of herbicides to rice. Agriculture, I don't have to tell you, is really diverse in California, so we need even an additional tool. And fortunately, we do have that with our regulatory structure. At the local level, commissioners can add additional restrictions. In California, we have a program called the Restricted Materials Program. DPR can designate certain pesticides as needing to have additional conditions placed on them. What this does is allow the agricultural commissioner to require that anybody purchasing or using these materials, first off, need to be certified, need to be trained, but before they can purchase, they must come to the agricultural commissioner and obtain a permit. What this does is allows the agricultural commissioner to impose restrictions on the use of specific materials that will address local conditions. Starting with legislation, I'm just going to go through a little bit more detail on some examples of how we use these tools. In 2000, the legislature adopted the Healthy Schools Act. This applies to the use of pesticides at schools. This is statute or this is law. Under this law, each school must give a written notice to parents and staff identifying pesticides expected to be used in the coming year. The law also provides that parents and staff can register with the school district if they want to receive notification of individual pesticide applications. They must receive, if they choose to do so, they must receive notification prior to those applications, at least 24 hours prior. This law also requires, among other things, posting, and posting of applications must be made 24 hours prior and must remain up for 72 hours afterwards. The posting must include information such as product name, manufacturer, EPA reg number, scheduled date of application, and reason for the application. This legislation also requires use reporting of pesticides. Prior to this, pesticides that were applied on schools, we really didn't have a good idea of how much, when, where was being applied. This legislation or this law has actually been amended. The amendments become effective in July. It will require much more extensive reporting of the pesticides that are used on schools. It will apply to not only private applicators or hired pest control applicators that are making the application in schools, but it'll also apply to the schools themselves. They'll have to report the use of pesticides directly to DPR. And we have got another example of law, and I'm going to have Randy Sagawa cover this next slide.
Yeah, so fumigant pesticides are sort of a special class. They're gaseous pesticides and normally applied at higher rates than most other pesticides, and so they have at least the potential for a higher exposure. And so US EPA, DPR, and the Ag Commissioners all have some pretty stringent requirements on use of these fumigant pesticides. There's a buffer zone requirement. Anywhere from 25 feet to a couple of thousand feet, and that buffer zone distance is an area where applications are not allowed between the fumigated area and residences and businesses. The distance varies depending on the application rate, number of acres being treated, and method of application. In addition to the buffer zone, there are additional requirements for schools. When you're doing a fumigation near schools, you can't do it while that school is occupied if that school is within a certain distance. And so if the buffer zone is less than 300 feet, and the school has to be at least 1/8 mile or 660 feet from that application, or you can't do it unless it's on a weekend or when the school is not occupied. If you have a larger buffer zone, if the buffer zone is more than 300 feet, then you need at least 1/4 mile or 1,320 feet between the fumigated area and the school. And this part is a little complicated, so any questions on that? Okay, thanks.
As I mentioned, in California, we're very fortunate to have a much more sophisticated regulatory structure. We have our agricultural commissioners who help us carry out enforcement of pesticide regulatory activities at the local level. At the local level, there are several options. This slide gives an example of one particular case where the County of San Bernardino actually adopted an ordinance specific to mitigation of hazards associated with pesticides applied near schools. In this slide gives you an idea of what can be done. In the packet that you received when you came in, we've also got a table that summarizes 15 counties' mitigation measures that they have in place to address hazards associated with pesticides near schools. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But that pretty much summarizes what I wanted to cover as far as background. As you can see, we've got tools to work with. We've got examples to look at. That we have things that are working. We have some things that need some work. Again, you're going to hear this reoccurring theme. We're here to gather input. We want to hear from you. So at this point, I'll pass it over to...
So at this point, we would like to ask you to ask any questions of clarification that are specifically directly related to the presentation that George and Randy made, and then we will have a comment period following that. So if there are specific questions, we'd ask you to come up to the microphone and ask those. So are there any clarifying questions for the presentation? Yes, please come to the mic as we're webcasting.
At the end of your presentation, you said there were several things that need work. What, based upon your presentation, you didn't point out anything that needed work. What are the things that need work, quote unquote?
After we get done with the question on the presentation part, we're going to walk through that when we go through some of the concepts.
And when you get to that point, could you point out the specific science of what needs to occur that is the basis for this work to occur?
We'll do our best.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Always try to avoid turning the podium around because of the back to the audience thing, but since they're up there, we'll do it that way. Okay, so George, I'll encourage you to go on with the concepts. Oh, I'm sorry, Denise, is there a question?
Yes, there's a question from Dusty Ferentz from the California Citrus Mutual, and it was that on a slide shown earlier, there was something to the effect that risk near schools is minimal, as recognized by DPR. Can you show that again and elaborate?
Yeah, this slide. Yes. So as George mentioned earlier, one of DPR's functions is to do this continuous evaluation. And part of the continuous evaluation is for DPR to conduct monitoring of pesticides in air, pesticides in surface water, pesticides in groundwater, pesticides in food, and look at that data and evaluate the potential risk. Most of the data we've seen so far on all that monitoring indicates that the risk of pesticides is quite low. There are a few exceptions, such as fumigants, where we have buffer zones and other requirements, but for the most part, the risk for most pesticides, based on our evaluation, is quite low.
Thank you. Denise, were there any other questions that came in via email? Okay, thank you. George, if you'd like to continue with the concepts.
So again, as you came in today, you should have received a concept paper. It's the 8-page document, which has some appendices attached to it. We put that document together to provide you some information to take home that gives background and provides some reference information. In particular, I'd like to point out the appendices to that document. First off, Appendix 1 is a summary of the current county permit conditions. That's the table that I mentioned earlier. I might have these in the wrong order, but there's also an appendix that summarizes what is occurring in other states in the country with regard to mitigating hazards associated with applications near schools. And then a third document I'm losing track here because this is out of order. So we got the permit conditions, we've got a summary of what's going on in other states, and then there's a summary of a survey that we conducted of county ag commissioners. We did an informal survey where we asked county ag commissioners to look at all of the complaints that they received over a period of 4 years. And I need to back up and make it clear that in California, we have a long-running policy that whenever there is a complaint that is in any way, shape, or form related to or mentions a pesticide, we, DPR, and the county ag commissioners follow up on those complaints. So the counties keep a pretty good, accurate record of the complaints, and there's a summary of that information in the appendix. So with these three pieces of information and then the concept paper, we pretty much boiled it down to there are two major areas of concern that we need to address and establish a statewide policy, rule, regulation, standard, whatever we want to call it, but we think it needs to be a rule. Those two areas are increased communication about pesticide applications near schools, and two, reducing the potential of exposure of children to pesticides by imposing additional restrictions on applications near schools. There are three distinct groups that will be affected. School administrators, folks in this room, growers and applicators, and community, parents, and teachers. Again, we understand there are concerns about the exposure to children, and that's why we're here. We want your input. We're here to develop regulations that can work for everybody. This is not a short process. Just restating again, this will take us a while to put together. This is phase one, informal communications. We're here to gather information. We haven't started any formal rulemaking. I think Chris is going to respond to the gentleman's concern regarding science.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the way I'd respond to that is, I think what we're doing is responding to the public's concerns. And so as we get through our process, as we get all the information available to us, I mean, when we put a regulation in place, normally it's got to be practical and it's got to be enforceable from a DPR perspective. So those are the two criteria that we're going to look at, and we're going to look at all our available sciences we normally do in any regulation.
Thank you, Chris and George. So now we really are going to open it up to the public comment period. I would encourage all of you, again, we are webcasting today, so we will spend some time in the room, and periodically we will see if Denise has received any email questions. I would ask you to come to the microphone. You can either use your comment cards, and we will collect them at the end if you prefer to have those comments in written form, or you can go ahead and jot down some ideas to help you and aid you if you prefer when making your presentations, your comments. And I would encourage all of us to listen very carefully. This is an informal process, and it is before the rulemaking part of the broader, longer process. I would encourage us to listen very carefully to one another so that we can avoid repetition. So if your point has been raised or your question has been raised, let's keep moving. And because it's my job as the facilitator to make sure that everybody who wishes to speak has some time and space to do that in what is a limited time frame, I might ask you in some cases to wrap up, and I appreciate and I in advance your cooperation with that. So what we're going to do now is I will start by posing some questions around these concepts. We are not confined to those questions. You can raise other questions and bring up any other input that you may have, but this will sort of get us going, and they're related directly to the concepts that George has raised around notification and potential restrictions on additional restrictions for the potential use of pesticides near schools. So the first one is, do you currently follow voluntary or mandatory notification requirements for pesticide applications made around schools? Realizing that the focus of this particular meeting is right on the community of applicators and of industry. So the question is to you, do you currently follow voluntary or mandatory notification requirements for pesticide applications made around schools? So from your perspective, if you'd like to share what some of those requirements are, we would encourage you to come up and make your comments.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Paul Van Konynenberg. I farm, my company's name is Britton Konynenberg Partners. We farm 1,300 plus acres in and around Modesto, California. We abut to 2 existing schools and 1 piece of property that is that's owned by a school district but not yet developed. We have, those schools are Grigori High School, Modesto Christian School, and the Salida Union School District. So your specific question is, we have a strong relationship with each of the school site administrators, with Principal Jeff Albritton at Grigori High School, who's just retired, so there'll be a new administrator, and with Andy Strickland, who's the facility administrator for Modesto Christian School. We are within the 1,300 feet around those schools, the existing school sites. We follow a protocol of always, in addition to all the label requirements, we always do any application of any regulated material in an off-hour application. So school is not in session and there is no school-sponsored activities going on. We do notify those administrators when we are using organophosphates or carbamates, sorry. Yeah, and we do that voluntarily. I guess the concern I have is that the material that you provided in the background material showed that over the last 4 years there has not been any injury or exposure or illness. In our case, Commissioner O'Hare is here, who regulates our county. And we also operate under global gap. I guess the question would be, if growers are following all those steps, the EPA step, the DPR step, the county commissioner, the label step, global gap, most of us are either certified at global gap now or will have to be certified. How can there be exposure that would cause injury or illness? That's the question. If we follow all the current regulations, is it possible to have injury or illness? And so that would be a question I would want you, the existing guidelines, by your own evidence of the survey you did, seem to say that there hasn't been a problem. So those will be the things that, in answer to your question, that I would raise.
Thank you very much for your comments. How about anything coming via email? Any other comments or questions directly related to this question that we've posed? Thank you. Let's go ahead and move on. So we're going to go into what should DPR consider from your perspective when developing a regulation that may include notification requirements for pesticide applications made near schools. What would you like for DPR to consider? Please.
Good afternoon. Chris Valadez, representing the California Fresh Fruit Association. Question to you, gentlemen. On Appendix 1, the summary of complaints, looking at off-campus pesticide use complaints, which for our grower base that may have agricultural property that they farm that's close to or adjacent to a school, I'm looking at some of the complaints identified, some of which are no known health-related issues, but a complaint received relating to noise, helicopter noise is cited, visual concern was created. Someone saw somebody using Roundup on a city park that was located close to a school, a maintenance person adjacent to a preschool yard. So there's a few things on here that I'm seeing, which, if we're talking about your consideration of concepts moving, what may move into the future of the development of a regulation, what is your process, or can you describe the process that you may have to qualify or filter complaints received, where you are then assessing the weight of the complaint? Because if in fact you are using as data to support what may be a future action, and data being survey and or complaints issued through a survey that you've collected, how are you weighing the complaints received? Because in some respects, someone's saying, okay, complaint of a notification process not being followed, or school administrators asked for information of pesticide use near schools. However, you guys note, or it's noted by DPR, permit conditions were followed and there was no report of drift or exposure. So if those types of examples are being qualified at this stage as a complaint, I guess I would be concerned representing the community that we do represent. How is that type of information being utilized by DPR to support moving forward in the creation of a regulation? Thank you.
Chris, thank you for your comments. I think what I would say to that is, I think as we get down the road here in terms of, we're very familiar with that survey. We know what the survey says. We know that based on that survey, there was things on there that weren't what I call directly impacting schools, so to speak. So we're fully aware of that. And I think as we develop, both as we get into the notification side and the restriction side, I think that's where we want to stick to, what I characterize as the real issues. That would be our focus.
Hi, good afternoon. So the question is, what should DPR consider when developing this potential regulation? So I'd like to provide comments from CAPCA this afternoon. My name is Gary Schultz. I reside at 2553 River Plaza Drive in Sacramento, and I serve as President and Chief Executive Officer of the California Association of Pest Control Advisors, also known as CAPCA. I represent 3,000 members of the association and 4,000 pest control advisors licensed by the Department of Pesticide Regulation in California. PCAs serve at the intersection of the agricultural production industry and the regulatory structure of government concerning pesticides, pesticide use, and pest control. In this capacity, our PCAs work closely with the grower, applicator, county ag commissioner, staff at DPR, and others in the stewardship of pesticide use and environmental protection. The Pest Control Advisor license is required by legislation with close collaboration between DPR, CAPCA, and colleges and universities in identifying, recruiting, training, and engaging graduates entering the profession. The PCA license must be obtained with substantial education, experience, testing, and renewed with at least 40 hours of professional continuing education every 2 years. Anyone who sells pesticides, writes recommendations for application, or represents themselves as an expert of pesticides or pesticide use must have a pest control advisor license. Pesticides are tools used by growers to ensure the health of plants. They may be made from synthetic or natural chemicals, natural minerals, or microorganisms. Pesticides are often used in conjunction with other control methods in pest management, including pheromones and predatory or parasitic insects. Used under the guidance of professionals like PCAs, pesticides are valuable tools that are safe when applied properly and judiciously. Agriculture and the use of pesticides in the state of California is the most regulated in the United States. Pesticides and pesticide use by California growers are regulated by Cal EPA's Department of Pesticide Regulation, with pest control advisors playing an integral part of the daily decisions of growers concerning what steps to take in controlling pests. The PCA evaluates the grower's crop conditions, identifies the pest to be treated, and writes a recommendation for the grower considering integrated pest management, IPM, and environmental conditions such as weather, surrounding crops, surrounding environmental sensitive areas, especially schools, and the allowances as stated on the various material labels and the restrictions by Cal EPA. Written recommendations by PCAs for growers desiring pesticide applications, especially near schools, are always carefully considered as mandated by CEQA. CAPCA urges DPR to base any regulatory decision relative to schools on the best available science. CAPCA is a trade association celebrating its 41st year in 2016. Its purpose is to support and promote agricultural pest control advisors. Our efforts are guided by a 21-member board of directors with professional activities throughout the state of California by 16 chapters. Major initiatives include communications, pathway to PCA, crop teams, and the CAPCA Leadership Institute. Our annual conference and trade show was attended by over 1,400 PCAs and industry professionals in 2015. CAPCA Ed produces or supports over 60 continuing ed opportunities for our members and other license holders. CAPCA, in collaboration with PAPA, sponsors the Continuing Education Center for Pest Management. This program professionally tracks and verifies attendance by license holders as they work to attain their 40 hours of credit every 2 years. CECPM provides assurance to the license holder and the Department of Pesticide Regulation that association member PCAs and applicators are correct in their renewal application. CAPCA also follows legislation and regulatory initiatives for all license holders and has a mutually productive and professional relationship with the California Certified Crop Advisors. Thank you very much.
Oh, I was going to ask you to wrap it up.
I am.
Sounds like you are.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to present the professional qualifications and continuing ed training of the Pest Control Advisor relative to pesticides and pesticide use near schools in California. CAPCA plans to submit further written comments at a later date. And please call on any of our members or me should you have any questions or concerns about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gary. Other comments directly pertaining to the question we posed? Okay, let's see what else we've got in store here. If notification is required, how and when should you provide notification? So on the topic of any new regulations related to notification, what comments or questions might you have related to notification from your perspective?
I'm the only one getting up, but it doesn't bite.
Thank you for that.
One issue is that not all regulated materials are equal. So if you put up 1 million warning signs, they lose their value because we all go into restaurants that have that warning signs on it and we don't think about it anymore. If you require a warning sign for everything, it will lose all its value. I would just state that the current label requirements have notification requirements when they're a value as it is.
Thank you. Other comments related to notification? Feel free to approach the mic. How about via email? Do we have anything, Denise? Okay, thank you. So moving on to potential restrictions, do you currently follow voluntary or mandatory restrictions for pesticide application made around schools? Do we feel like we've addressed this already? Have we? Yeah, we've already addressed that. What should DPR consider when developing a regulation that may include restrictions on pesticide application near schools? So what possible restrictions? I mean, thinking about timing and distance, those sorts of things. Others? Anything coming in, Denise? And you're really free to raise your own questions as well. So let me run through these and see if something's grabbing you. Do you have any issues or concerns about coordinating or managing pesticide applications restrictions with school administrators, county agricultural commissioners, or pest control businesses? Any concerns around that coordination piece? We've heard a little bit, Paul, you've talked about your developing how you have close relationships with many of these existing folks already. That's very helpful to know that. But anything else related to possible concerns with that coordination? Thank you, Leslie.
Hi, good afternoon. Leslie Garcia, Technology Sciences Group. As a consultant that works with a lot of ag chemical companies, and as a member of a grower family and as a mother, I feel like I embody all of these stakeholders you're trying to reach. But one thing, it's more of a comment. One thing I do want to address is that when you are preparing for these stakeholder meetings, I think we need to do a better job emphasizing the good work that you already do. As Gary mentioned, pesticides are highly regulated, the most in the U.S. And so I think we need to showcase the licensing process, the permitting process, because it's based on your concepts. The gap is the communication to the public. And I feel like maybe the public doesn't understand all the good work that the department does. So I think there could be some improvements on showcasing that from a recommendation on just a comment on managing concerns for notifications. I think that DPR should give a lot of flexibility to the counties. Not all counties are created equal, and I've worked with several of the ag commissioners in the room. There's going to have your coastal counties with different priorities, and your central coast, San Joaquin Valley is a totally different agricultural profile than Northern California. So I think that whatever regulations you intend to make have that flexibility in mind.
Other comments or questions?
Greg Clark, Napa County Agricultural Commissioner. Some of you may be wondering why all the ag commissioners in the back room are being quiet. It's not that we don't have anything to say. It's that there was a meeting prior to this with school administrators, and we gave input on the same questions that you're being asked, as well as superintendent. So I do have a question about recognizing this is the second of many meetings to come. There's going to be a lot of comments. Some are going to be very similar. I'm assuming there's a way to get, for instance, comments from the previous meeting that people might have an understanding that remarks were made. The issue regarding how would you go about providing notification? There's pretty much silence. We talk about email, voicemail, fax machine. Who's responsible for providing that notice to other people in the community? Is it the grower? Is it the school administrator? Is it the ag commissioner? And on and on. So I didn't want you to think that we were sitting in the back of the room being silent because we don't have thoughts or that we don't care. This is the industry meeting. And so I don't want anyone from industry to, one, think that ag commissioners aren't interested or don't have a say in this, because we do, and we've communicated that, and as these meetings roll out, there will be more. But this is really the opportunity for the industry to make its thoughts and feelings known about this. With that said, I will also say that we are dealing with an issue that the science may not affect the outcome, because what we're dealing with is a perception issue that people believe there are certain risks and things happening. But I will state for the record that whatever decisions are made, if a regulatory packages move forward, is that it is based on the best science and the best data possible. Because as others have said, agriculture does a good job. The data as we see it doesn't support further restrictions in most cases. So anyway, I just, if industry has something to say, don't be afraid to say it.
Thank you, Greg, for providing that context for conversations that we had in the last meeting. Yes.
Hello, my name is Abby Ash. I am a resident of Monterey County. I am currently a licensed pest control advisor. I have a bachelor's degree in genetics from UC Davis. And To piggyback a little bit onto what was mentioned earlier, I won't go into it too much, but I was required to take a fair amount of coursework regarding crop health and pest management, as well as field experience before I was even qualified to take the pest control advisor exam, which I have passed in multiple categories. I'm currently employed by TriCal. It's a family-run business. It's on their third generation. We have over 50 years of specializing in soil fumigation. And when I first approach a field, the first thing that I look at as a pest control advisor and somebody arranging these types of applications is safety. I look at sensitive sites around the field. I determine the need for treatment, what is the best, most effective treatment, and can it be done safely? I look if there's a school, and as a business, we walk away from fields that we don't feel like they can be done safely. So we do take that into consideration. We follow all the current state, county requirements, the label requirements, and we do walk away from fields even when we feel like we can comply with everything, but there may be an extenuating circumstance that makes it so it's not a good application to do. Or we reschedule it or consider, is there a time over a holiday weekend or something along those lines where the application can be made more efficiently and safely. I put together a little bit of an example here of what goes into an application. I've got a map showing the buffer zone, the notification zone around that, the distance to a school. I always talk with my growers and make sure that they're aware of all the concerns in the area. All of my growers that are near schools are very aware of this. They talk with the principals, with the people around the schools, or in some cases they have a facility manager that takes control over that. Those are voluntary. They're doing it on their own to try and make everything run smoothly in the communities. They go through a permitting process. We have to do an individual site plan for each application. We turn that into the counties. They review all of that before approving it and adding the materials to their permit. Then we submit a notice of intent and the field is checked again. So somebody from the county is going out and looking at these sites to make sure that under the current conditions that application can be made safely. A lot of times we have to reschedule jobs. We're surrounded by harvest crews. And so we have to consider the safety of everybody in the vicinity. We reschedule jobs on a frequent basis. I would be concerned that we would end up notifying schools on such a frequent basis when jobs weren't going on that they would start to ignore the actual notification rather than the voluntary system that we're already using. Let's see. Another thing that we've switched to as far as fumigants are concerned is we've moved away from the old tarps that we used to use, the high-density polyethylenes, and we've switched over to totally impermeable films. Those are 7-layer plastics that have an EVOH layer in them. That's the same technology they use in gas tanks to prevent off-gassing from fuels. Those are utilized extensively around schools. And there have been studies recently that show that emissions around schools have been substantially reduced from previous years. As it's mentioned, we already have the strictest regulations anywhere in the nation. We follow them. Safety is our primary concern. If a field can't be treated, if it can't be farmed safely, then it can't be farmed. That's just the way it is. As going forward, creating these regulations, these proposed regulations, hope that scientific data, flux studies, all of those things are taken into account and put together thoughtfully. Because the more restrictions, these were updated in January of this year, our fumigation regulations. This is something additional. So we have very current regulations in place. Additional restrictions will end up adding to the price of fresh fruits and vegetables to the consumers. Questions for me?
Questions coming in via email? Thank you, Denise. Other comments or questions, please? Would you like to approach? Thank you for running the mic.
Can I just ask a general question of the facilitator? Will there be time after the specific questions for general comments? Because I don't necessarily want to, I'm sure there's some of us here that have sort of general concerns and general comments, but will there be time after the specific questions to give those, or do you
Yes.
want us to just come up?
Well,
Just a process question.
Yes, it's a good process question, and we will have time, and we wish to have time. So let's move through these questions, and then I invite you to come up. Anything else specifically on this? And let me just ask, because that's a really good process question, let's find out by a show of hands, how many of you just have general comments that you're waiting to make? Okay. So I see 5 hands right now. That gives me a good sense of making sure that I make the time for that. So are there any other impacts to your farming operations that you would like to express? And we're there. So we're there. So I would invite anyone who has general comments to please go ahead and approach the podium and please make your comments. And then I might stop after a couple of you and see if we have anything coming in via webcast. I invite general comments and questions.
Good afternoon. Rodney Schatz. I'm from Lodi. Just some general points. First off, I'm a grower of around 1,200 acres of exclusively wine grapes. And to be specific about the fumigation issue, not that I farm near a school or relatively close to a school, but the fact of fumigation and the need for it is, in fact, we just got done using this professional group, TriCal, to do a 45-acre block. And the points I'd like to make would be that, the grower of our size isn't even capable of doing such a project. We'll hire outside professional staff to do that, or outside professional company to do that. And just that mere fact and all these layers of control is clear enough to me to show you that, we're very concerned about what we do when we're out in the field, and probably even extremely concerned when we're operating close to a school, for that matter. The other thing I'd like to say, just in our district, we've even gone beyond the regulations and put together a program called Lodi Rules, where the growers now are quantifying what they do on their own behalf.
Sorry, what was that?
The organization's called Lodi Rules.
Lodi Rules, thank you.
And so it's just the next step that the grower is taking to, step forward and take care of what needs to be done to produce quality products in a very safe fashion. Thanks.
Others? General comments?
Lost my earring, losing my shoes. Rough afternoon, 4 o'clock. Hi, my name's Rachel Kubiak. I'm with Western Plant Health Association. We're an association that represents the interests of crop protection, nutrient, and biotechnology providers, retailers, distributors that do business in California, Hawaii, and Arizona. We certainly appreciate DPR's effort to hold these public workshops to assist in discussions concerning potential regulations regarding pesticide use around schools. We appreciate DPR's ongoing interest in ensuring the safe environment for children in schools. I know many of us here today are also parents and moms and have children in schools, so we certainly appreciate the interest in the subject. And we believe that it's an issue of all Californians, and the issue doesn't lie solely with the crop protection products, but extends to the decision makers and the leaders that are responsible for planning and developing schools in agricultural areas. We hope and anticipate the recommendations that are made and developed by DPR won't stop at the regulation of the crop protection products, but will include recommendations to ensure accountability is placed also on the decision makers who approve locations of schools going forward, so that hopefully this isn't a reoccurring issue and that we can avert this in the future. As you know, crop protection products are thoroughly assessed before and after they're registered that has been noted. Worth repeating that we have the most thorough and stringent regulatory process in the nation, probably in the world, here in California. And, you know, even though allegations sometimes are otherwise made contrary to that, you know, we hope that DPR, and this was noted before, that DPR will maintain their scientific integrity by continuing to utilize the assessments of credible, responsible scientific bodies, including those of staff at DPR, and the integrity of that process, that it's been in place for a really long time, and that this would be science-based. By all accounts, including looking at DPR's own databases and documents that are publicly available, including pesticide illness surveillance and other databases, the regulations being proposed really don't appear to be science-based or indicative of a documented health issue. And we question the need for additional regulations in this area. To maintain a sound regulatory structure, it's our hope the proposed regulations will be crafted to address a proven risk versus unsubstantiated claims to that effect. We certainly appreciate your intent to increase communication, and that's something that's beneficial clearly to all sides. But we hope that any recommendation that's put forward and support that it's fair and placed accordingly, so that growers don't end up carrying more of than their fair share with added unwarranted financial burdens. So we hope that you will consider that going forward, and we appreciate you having these today and throughout the next couple of weeks. So thank you.
Please.
Yeah, good afternoon. Matthew Allen, Western Growers Association. Our members are primarily in California, but also in Arizona. Right now in about 32 different states across the nation, and we can best be thought of as providing produce in the grocery store. Provide about 50% of the nation's fresh fruit, nuts, and vegetables, and about half of the fresh organic produce in America right now. I just wanted to make a couple of very, very brief comments. I think one of the common themes we're hearing today is that anything moving forward really needs to be based upon science. And I would just hazard a guess that that's one reason why there haven't been a whole lot of folks coming up to provide comment, just due to the fact that in reading the documentation and looking through the evidence on the record, growers are doing a really solid and positive job in making sure they're following the label requirements, the restrictions and regulations that are currently in place. And the lack of exposure and incidents and illnesses really demonstrates, I think, that commitment. You know, I come from a farm family, and I could just say from a personal level that really nobody cares more about the safety of the school children and the community when it comes to pesticides than the grower. You know, it's their livelihood, and they do everything in their power to make sure that the products are applied correctly and by the label. I would also say that this conversation doesn't occur strictly within the vacuum of the question about pesticides around schools. As additional science becomes available, I know DPR goes through a continual reevaluation process when it comes to specific active ingredients. And as that science becomes available, those labels may or may not change accordingly. And so we feel right now that based upon just the lack of science on this issue, that we don't know that anything additional is necessary at this point in time. But again, we remain open to the discussion, and we appreciate the ability to make some comments here today.
Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Josh Rolfe. I'm with the California Farm Bureau Federation. We represent about 59,000 farmers and ranchers throughout the state. Many of those who might farm around a school facility would be in our membership. And I guess again, not to sound overly redundant here, would echo the words of those previously who have questioned the science backing this effort by DPR to move forward with the regulation. When you combine the words pesticide and schools, or the implication pesticides and children, I think that kind of brings out a populist urge in all of us. I have 4 young children myself, and as has been mentioned about the lack of education among the general public, I think this is really an opportunity where the DPR could be taking a leadership role in expressing the regulations that are currently on the books and how well they are working. Just on Tuesday, there was a DPR report released that showed that Salinas, one of the most probably heavily used, I don't have stats to back this up, areas of chemicals, has air quality standards that, or air quality tests that show that it's well below levels that have existed previously, and it's even trending downward, which is an indication that the rules are working, the current laws in place. And where now, with DPR coming out with proposed regulation, and even in the SACB, Director Leahy put out that this regulation was moving forward and these workshops were taking place, and that could have been an opportunity instead to outline the successes. And so I guess that would be my remarks. Additionally, I would just say that in many cases, farmers didn't choose to be near a school, but because of zoning laws, schools have been plopped down on an existing farm. And the current law that exists, Farm Bureau supported. There's another bill being considered, Senate Bill 313, that Farm Bureau sponsored that would affect future school sites. And so with that, I'd leave that as our comment, but appreciate the opportunity for us to speak.
Thank you, Josh. Other comments?
I'm Marla Livingood with the California Strawberry Commission. We represent 400 family growers that grow strawberries throughout the state. California strawberry farmers grow 90% of the nation's strawberries and create over 70,000 jobs. I myself grew up on a family farm, and I know that no one cares more than the grower about the safe use of pesticides and safe application. Strawberry growers' families, their children, their employees live in the same communities where they grow, so they want to ensure safe practices. California has the most comprehensive pesticide application regulations in the nation. Strawberry farmers are complying with federal, state, and county regulations and restrictions to do safe practices. Over the years, as the population's increased, there's been, as others have said, more schools on prime ag land. And as a result, there have been stricter regulations. As a mother, I understand that people have questions and that they may not understand what's the pesticide use, and I understand the questions, but there's no cause for concern. So from looking at the data that you guys have prepared, there doesn't seem to be any evidence of any exposure, incident, or illness. So the data just does not support additional restrictions. We'd like to work with you and work with school districts to provide accurate information and to dispel any unwarranted fears that are out there. And I just thank you for the time to comment and listening to our concerns.
Thank you. Are there any other general comments? Yes, email.
We do have a comment from the Fontana Unified School District, and it was more related to what they have to do to send a notification home. And that is when the agricultural department or the city applies a pesticide on or near our school site, they provide a notice, and then the school district is required to send home that written notice to the parents, or they can do it via a phone call. If they do send the notice home, they have to send that notice to the print shop, get it to the site, and then send it to each teacher, who then has to go and give it to each of the students to give home to the parents. So they appreciate the ease of a phone call versus the notice.
Thank you. And that was it. That came in via email. Okay, any final comments or questions that you would like to make verbally? Pardon me? Well, we're getting there. Yes. Are you ready for the end? Okay. Well, as long as everybody has had an opportunity to speak, we will come to the end. So just checking in one last time. And it looks like we're okay. So I would encourage Chris to make final remarks, and I want to thank all of you for taking time to be here today and to make all of your very good comments.
Yes, folks, thank you again very much for taking time out of your collective busy schedules to be here and give us your thoughts and ideas. I'm just going to reiterate again some key time frames here. After this meeting, if you have additional thoughts or ideas, you'll have till July 31st, and you can send them to, and there'll be the next slide, who you can send them to, which will be George. And then December 15th, that is our target to come out with a notice related to this regulation, and we fully anticipate we're going to have a 45-day comment period. My thinking right now is we're probably going to get requests for a public workshop, and as I indicated earlier on, we fully expect this regulation to, fully take a year. This will be a complex regulation, and we expect probably be done the end of December 2016, early 17. So that's sort of our time frame that we're working on. So anyway, I really appreciate George. Next slide. It just is indicated, a presentation is available on our website, and more importantly, those follow-up comments, which I really would encourage folks to utilize, is to George Farnsworth, who's our point on this, and I'd appreciate any last questions that are out there. If not, then thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, folks. Oh, no, Joe? No, okay, Joe.
Yep, please.
My name's Joe Morio. I'm the Ag Commissioner of Modoc County, California, and it sure sounds like if it isn't broke, please don't fix it. I don't know if that's part of the process or not. But there's problems at schools. It doesn't sound like they're pesticide related. I would say they're schools with high non-vaccination rates are put not only our kids but the rest of society at extreme risk, and the dropout rate is way too high. Compare the rates of pesticide possible exposures with the dropout rate, and you'll clearly see the problem in schools. So by the way, we want our kids in schools. We do think they're safe, and when they're there, please have them take math, physics, chemistry, and biology, so they will have the tools to deal with these issues in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I want to make sure that we collect your comment cards. If there are any written comments, I'll be standing by the door as you leave, and please do hand those to me. Again, thank you for being here.